Hi there, welcome to part 3 of sculpting a realistic human inside of Zbrush. And if you haven't seen part 1 or 2, what I do here is I start with the skeleton and then I add all these individual muscles. I talk about where they originate, where they insert, and after I'm done with that I will merge everything together with dynamesh and sculpt it to a nice realistic looking result. If you wonder why I start with this boring stuff, I mean, it's probably not the most exciting to watch, but I feel like it's an important aspect that I personally neglected for too long, and I thought I could figure out anatomy by just looking at reference images from the outside, and then I just achieve it by basically copying it without understanding the underlying structure. Well, that's kind of naive, and but maybe some of you are in the same shoes, so hopefully that helps you in this way. And I want to quickly mention that the skeleton is not by myself. It's a skeleton from a tutorial I bought a while ago from Raphael Corsetti, and so I don't want to get credit for that. So I'm starting with the brachialis muscle here, which is a muscle that lies right underneath the biceps. Its origin is in the halfway on the humerus, which is the upper arm bone, and it then inserts into the ulna, which is one of the two forearm bones, the other one being the radius. The brachialis muscle is especially noticeable when you have your arm flexed, then it's bulging out, pushing the biceps out a bit, and you can see it then, because that's the basic function of the brachialis, is when to flex the forearm. So if you have that pose where the arm is maybe 90 degrees or more, really flexed, then you can see it the most. You can also see it from the inside though, so in some poses that's adding to the shape of the arm as well. So next we have the biceps brachii. This muscle has two heads, the short and the long head. The short head is on the inside and the long head on the outside. We have the origin points at different points. So for the short head it's the coracoid process, and it's basically part of the scapula. It kind of looks like a hook, and it's attachment point for a couple of muscles. And then for the long head it runs above the humerus, and then but it also inserts into the scapula then, but a kind of a good bit apart if you look at the pictures I provided here. But you can see they both then merge into one big shape, and then they both insert into the radius. So what's important to note here is that towards the bottom of the biceps you have a diagonal line. So the long head on the outside has the mass a bit higher up, so you get a diagonal shape towards the bottom, and that's very important to include a straight line in any scenario of really any design, but also anatomy looks very artificial and boring. So you will find that especially if you're learning this for sculpting and artistic purposes, then it's important to really indicate that you have this angular shape towards the bottom. And you can even see a split between the two heads and individual shapes towards the bottom of the arm when it's flexed, and then for some in a fully flexed position you might even, and that's something you should probably reserve for superhero or bodybuilder kind of characters, where you have a full split between the two heads. And if that's implemented nicely, I think they can look pretty dope too. Now the Coracobrachialis muscle, it's not a huge muscle compared to the other upper arm muscles, but it's clearly visible when you have your arms over shoulder height, especially when it's flexed. You can see it in these poses when people flex their biceps, especially just like the short head of the biceps. It's originating in the coracoid process of the scapula, and then it's inserting like halfway on the humerus bone on the inside, and that's it. So next, the triceps. We have three heads: long head, medial and lateral head. While we have the long head originating on the kind of towards the outside of the scapula, we have the medial and the lateral head actually attaching on the humerus. The lateral head we have attaching a bit above the radial groove, which is just a small depression on the humerus bone, and then we have the medial head attaching a bit lower than the lateral head. And then all these three heads insert into a tendon then on the what's called the olecranon, which is basically your elbow, or also the end part of the ulna. When it comes to the shape of the triceps, we have definitely, from the silhouette, when you look at the arm from the front, we can see probably only for muscular individuals we have the lateral head of the triceps creating a small bulge, kind of adding to the silhouette, so that's important to keep in mind. And then the largest shape is probably the long head, so that's obviously only visible from the back, just like the medial head, which is kind of small in comparison, and you can find it more towards the coming out towards the bottom of the arm, close to the elbow. Very important though to add it in. If we take a look at the deltoid muscle now, we can see we have three parts. Anterior, also called clavicular part, because that's the part that attaches to the clavicle. It's attaching to the outside third. And then we have the middle part, also called the acromial part, because it's attaching to the acromion process, which is a part of the scapula. It's the highest point of the scapula, and it's a very important bony landmark. You can see with almost everyone can't really be covered with fat or muscles because it's the highest point. And when the muscle is attached to it, they don't really go much higher than that. And so that's important to know. And then we have finally, posterior part, also called the spinal part. The spinal part referring to the spine of the scapula, again attaching to 1/3, this time of the spine of the scapula, and then it's all inserting into the what's called the deltoid tuberosity. So that's basically a small bump on the humerus, very much in the middle of the humerus. So that's a common mistake actually for people to make the deltoid way too short, attaching it way higher, and it's actually halfway down. And it's also a bit towards the front, so it's not exactly in the middle. So that gives this nice kind of arch or swinging flow towards the front. So it's creating this curve towards the front, not exactly going straight down. And what's also interesting or useful to know is the deltoid is not exactly round from the side. So you can see you have it's actually a small indent towards the middle, and the reason for that is because the middle part is actually a multipennate muscle. And multipennate, I have to read that from Wikipedia now. It says having the fibers arranged at multiple angles in relation to the axis of force generation. So I guess what that's saying is because it's included in so many complex movement and has to perform so many different angles of a movement, you have all these different tendons in the muscle, so they kind of form like kind of fingers intersecting into each other, and where they intersect towards the middle, they kind of create a dent. It's probably easy to see on the picture, hard to grasp when I say it, like explain it that badly, but so that's important because it affects the silhouette, and I think adding that in would enhance the realism as opposed to making it a completely round shape that would look probably more cartoony. Alright, moving on to the forearms. Now the forearms are a bit more complex, so we have 20 forearm muscles. I only cover 13 here though, because I feel like these are the ones that are really necessary to know as an artist. Of course it's better to dive in deeper as you progress in your anatomy learning, but let's start with these. These are the ones that contribute to the large shape of the forearm. And we can divide the forearm muscles into two groups, the flexors and the extensors. And these two groups are very much visible as distinct shapes in all kind of poses of the arm. So with different rotations of the wrist, we have of course a different looking result, so to say. And if you take a look at the bone, so we have the ulna and the radius. The ulna are pretty much staying stationary, and it's the longer bone on the back of your arm, and then you have the radius. If you rotate your wrist, it's really the radius turning around, and of course the muscles attaching getting pulled and change in shape then. So I just added the Flexor carpi ulnaris muscle, and at this point I want to mention that it's probably useful to learn some of these words, what they mean, because for example the Flexor carpi ulnaris, what it means is the flexor of the carpi. Carpi is the genitive form of carpus, meaning wrist, so it's flexing the wrist, and ulnaris just meaning on the ulnar side. So you have ulnaris, ulnar side, and then radialis, the radial side. So and then if you learn these kind of names, it's useful because you have more muscles that also have these words in them, and then it's basically have the function of the muscle in the name. So that makes everything easier probably if you learn it once. So if you look at the Flexor carpi ulnaris now, we can see the origin is in the medial epicondyle of the humerus. So that's the end part of the humerus. There's a protrusion, that's the epicondyle muscle. A lot of the muscles, all the flexor muscles attached to there. But you also then have it attached to the olecranon. If you remember, that's the elbow, so part of the ulna, and it's also attaching to the posterior border of the ulna. So quite a bit. You don't need to learn that all right away, but probably it's good to know that you have all these flexor muscles attaching there on the inside of the upper arm bone there on the medial epicondyle. That's actually a bony landmark too. You can see it pretty obvious in many poses from the back. The Flexor carpi ulnaris was inserting into the metacarpal and carpal bones. The carpal bones make the wrist, and then the metacarpals are basically the middle of the hand. The fingers are called the phalanges. And the next muscle that I'm adding here is the Flexor digitorum superficialis, and digitorum meaning of the fingers, so flexor of the fingers. This one inserting in the phalanges therefore. The origin here again is the medial epicondyle, but it's also originating in part of the ulna and also the radius. Here we have the Flexor carpi radialis, so this time on the radial side, again the origin in the medial epicondyle, and the insertion this time on the metacarpal bones. Next we have the Palmaris longus. Palmaris meaning the palm side of the hand, helps again flex the wrist, and again origin at the medial epicondyle, and the insertion here is the flexor retinaculum, and this is a tendon, a big tendon on the wrist that I will talk about more on the hand part, because there are a lot of muscles on the hand that attach there as well. Okay, let's take a look at the extensor muscles now. There's still one more flexor to add later, the Pronator teres, but for now let's look at the extensor carpi ulnaris. So again carpi, the wrist, and then it's extending it. The extensor carpi ulnaris origin is the lateral epicondyle of the humerus. So remember we had the medial epicondyle, which was this bump on the inside of the arm where all the flexor muscles attached. Now we have one more bump, the lateral epicondyle, lateral meaning to the side of the upper arm bone, and that's where all our extensors attach. So this one then runs all the way down and inserts into the little middle of the hand, where towards the side where the little fingers. Next we have our extensor digitorum. So digitorum again of the fingers, extensor extending, and then the origin again in the lateral epicondyle, and it's inserting then basically in all the fingers except the thumb. Next, if we look at the extensor carpi brevis, that one can be really pronounced when it's flexed, and it's showing sort of in the middle of the forearm, and it's originating again at the lateral epicondyle of the humerus. It's then covered mostly by the extensor digitorum, and also the extensor carpi longus, which is a muscle that's on top, but then shows towards the middle, and then towards the bottom gets covered again. There's two muscles that are overlapping it, then the adductor pollicis, and then the other one, the extensor pollicis brevis. Now the extensor carpi longus muscle originates a tad higher than the brevis, a bit higher on the humerus, and together with the brachioradialis, that's really creating this very prominent bulge on the top of the forearm that really adds to the silhouette and helps this really really nice rhythm of curves then. So the extensor carpi radialis with the brachioradialis really creates this convex shape, and then it goes in, and then on the shoulder we have the next convex shape. Okay, the brachioradialis muscle that I just mentioned, this one originating even a bit higher than the extensor carpi radialis longus, and this one, although the extensor muscles of course are known to extend the forearm, this one really helps flex the arm, the forearm, when the hand is in a neutral or semi-pronated position. So maybe we should talk about the positions of the wrist. So we have supinated, so that's when there's a good way to remember this. So if you can remember with the soup, if someone holding the waiter holding the soup, it's having the palm upside, that's supinated. And then we have pronated, which is then the other way, the palm down. And then we have semi-pronated, so I call that neutral position. In weightlifting, I think that's a neutral grip. Next we have the anconeus muscle. It's a small one, but still important because it's close to the elbow, and if you leave it out, there's just something missing. And again, as the other extensors, it's originating in the lateral epicondyle, and insertion is in the lateral surface of the olecranon, so that's the elbow. Okay, so now the Pronator teres, one more flexor that I left out. This one is the most lateral of the flexors. It kind of spans across the two bones. It has two heads originating in the humerus and also part of the ulna, and then they inserted the lateral part of the radius. Okay, so the last two muscles that I have here, the abductor pollicis longus and the adductor pollicis brevis. The pollicis is Latin meaning thumb, so they both move the thumb. And if we look at the origin for the abductor pollicis longus, we have it's halfway of the radius, but then also the ulna and the interosseous membrane. So there's a membrane that's connecting both forearm bones and also a Lowe's muscle like this one to attach. Then we have them both inserting to the thumb. So if we look at the shape of them very quickly, we can see actually the abductor pollicis longus actually attaches pretty high compared to what we see. So it's covered by the extensor digitorum, but then towards the wrist, then it comes out underneath, and then even covers the extensor carpi radialis muscles, and it creates a slight change in the silhouette. So that's why I added these muscles in lastly, especially when the arm is flexed in a neutral position, then you can see it the most. But that's one more detail, that these changes in silhouette are important, so it just doesn't look so uniform and just like a tube. So that's why I added them in last. So let's get to the sculpting.